the ship is better. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I faced the raging
All right, we're here for a reason, right? We're here for a reason to worship a holy and righteous God. And let's be clear about something before we move any further. No government in this land is able to take that away from us. You understand that? Can't do it. This is not what the sermon's about, but listen, our world's a nasty place, and you hear stuff all over the news, and God has given us the ability here in America to preach the gospel and to congregate freely, but I assure you, even if it was not legal, our God is still worthy to be praised, and He is holy enough that we should live our lives no matter what the circumstances of the world is telling us. Okay? So as a church, we've got to understand that as we move forward, I tell you, times are going to get rough. I told you a couple weeks ago that in our interjection of a complete surrender, that when those times get rough, we will probably know who is completely surrendered to God, because it won't take much for some people to get out of here. Because it's nice right now, isn't it? We don't got to worry about stuff, but there's probably coming a time very shortly to where this is going to be quite frowned upon, and your preacher's probably going to get asked to do certain stuff, and I really would covet your prayers. As a preacher of God's Word, I would like to think that I would be faithful, and I would like to think when that time comes that I would just be bold enough and free enough to say that no government's going to tell me what to talk about. And so pray with me as I pray for you about church, God, and our country. Deal? All right, good worship so far. We've kind of run a theme this morning. I don't know if Brother Gary did this purposely or what, but a theme of holiness, the word holy, as it's pertaining to us, to be set apart from the rest of the world, but when it pertains to God, a holy God is separated from everything else. You see, God was before creation. God was the creator of this world. God preceded humanity. He came before us. God has really always been. That's something that is hard for us to grasp and it's hard for us to put our minds around. But God has always been. And there's so much about God. Everything about God leads us to the fact that God is set apart from the rest of us. God is set apart from His creation. He transcends it all, does He not? And we're going to read in the story this morning about the holiness of our God. But as we did our Proverbs reading this week, these certain verses stuck out at me. He says in Proverbs 16:12, "It is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right. As messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it." It says in verse 15, "In the light of the king's face is life, and his favor is like a cloud of the latter rain." When I read this past Monday, I could not help but to think about the King of Kings. I could not help but to think about the greatest king that there ever has been and that there ever will be, God. His kingdom is established on righteousness, a pure righteousness, a holy righteousness. You definitely don't want to be on the wrath side of our King of Kings, because it is going to be very difficult and you're not going to be able to withstand it. And verse 15 there, as we look into His face, we find life. We find what we need. Back whenever I went to college for 1 year. And I've told y'all about it. I firmly believe that I went to that 1 year to meet my wife and to get married. And she did such a good job singing that special, didn't she? Sister Marie's even applaud for it. All right, I'll hear about that at lunch. But the college group that we were a part of up in Jonesboro, they had a Tuesday night meeting that about 75 to 100 of us college students, we met in a house, had worship, had speaking, and it was called Tuesday Night Encounter. And that word has always stuck with me, encounter, because an encounter is when you meet someone, but it has a lasting effect. you get something from that encounter. You draw something from it. As opposed to just say you're casually meeting somebody, you're just walking by somebody, it's a hey, how are you? Nice to see you. I'll see you again sometime soon. There was nothing there that you were able to draw from. This morning, our interjection, which this is the next to last week of this series, our interjection is that God injects into our life encounters, holy encounters, over simple, casual meetings. If you came here just haphazardly to spend time with us, I promise you, we're a fun group of people, but you've missed the boat on all this. Because hopefully you have come here this morning to worship God. Hopefully that this is more than just a passing by, just a moment that isn't going to do anything for you, but hopefully this is something that is going to create some sort of life change in you. An encounter, that's what we're going for. Whenever I met my wife for the first time, I promise you it wasn't a casual meeting. The girl changed my life. The first time that I met her, it was over. She had me. It wasn't one of those things that was just, hey, how are you? But it was a moment that completely changed my life. And dealing with God, that's what we're going for. For you not to just come in here and haphazardly worship, but for you to come in here and for you to encounter a holy God. And for you to walk out these doors never to be the same again. That's our prayer. We've prayed for you. We've prayed for the worship, and God did good. We prayed for the preaching, and I trust in God to do good. And so please, leave here this morning having spent time with your Maker, because He is holy and righteous enough to devote your whole entire life to give everything over to Him. Every relationship, every word, everything over to God. So we have a situation here, Moses in Exodus chapter 3. Of course, you know the backstory of Moses here. Moses is growing up in a time when the children of Israel are enslaved in the nation of Egypt, and to prevent the Israelites from becoming too big, Pharaoh says 2 years and under a male child is to be killed. And Moses' mom has Moses, hides him, nurses him for X amount of time, and then puts him in a little wooden boat and sends him up the river to where the Pharaoh's daughter is going to find him. And Moses grows up in Pharaoh's household. That's nice, isn't it? He had all of the goods of it. He had all of the education part of it, the prosperity part of it. Moses was living a good life. And so then he found himself. He killed an Egyptian. We'll talk about that here in a little while. He killed an Egyptian, had a little spat with one of the Israelites, and then he runs, and he is now in the city, in the area of Midian. He's a shepherd. He's married, got kids, creating a life for his own. And so let's read here in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And so he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. You're probably going to know this story. Moses is out shepherding, and he sees this bush, and it's on fire. Now, scientists, we don't got to come up with any sort of scientific explanation. When you see something burning, what's supposed to happen? Burns up. Okay, a couple of y'all did good. Rest of y'all need to take some science class. Moses sees this bush, especially wood. Wood burns. And he sees this bush, and it is not burning. It's engulfed in fire, and yet there's nothing happening to it. And so then verse 3, then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. Verse 4, so when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Let's pause there for a second. When did this interjection come about? When the Lord saw that he turned to look. That's interesting. I've never picked up on that. We've got a burning bush over here. Moses is shepherding somewhere, and he sees the bush, and a curiosity gets him. Let me turn aside. This is abnormal. This is not what it has always happened. Let me turn aside to look and to see what's going on. And when Moses turned, God said, Moses, Moses. Whenever we deal with God, you might say, whenever you encounter God, the first thing that God's going to tell you is about himself. It's about how good he is, about how holy he is. Because look at verse 5. Verse 5 says, then he said, do not draw near to this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Bush is burning. Moses is over here. He turns to look at it, and he goes to look, and God interjects, and he says, Moses, stop. Before you come any further, take off your shoes, for this ground is holy. Sidebar, I think if every time before we come in here to spend time with God, if we could have this reminder, stop, guys, stop. Leave everything else. Put everything down. Put everything away. Put all the distractions and all that mess up. This is God. We're dealing with a holy and perfect God. Take your shoes off, for this is holy ground. Wouldn't that enhance things? Wouldn't that bring a different level of reverence to God? Wouldn't that cause us to think about what he's done and who he is and what he continues to do? Wouldn't that bring a different element to our worship? Wouldn't that mean something different whenever we sing the song and we cry, holy, holy, holy? Wouldn't that mean something different? Wouldn't the idea of dwelling in Beulah land actually do something to us? The preaching of God's Word, when you hear it, wouldn't it actually ring into your heart the truths of who he is? Moses turns to walk and he says, Moses, Moses. If you notice, he didn't interject to get Moses' attention. The bush wasn't burning, and then he said, Moses, Moses, look at me. Isn't it just natural to look at the power and the wonder of God? I mean, isn't it just something to see his goodness and his righteousness and just to stand in awe of it? So when that happens, when we turn to God, the first thing that he's going to remind us and tell us is he says, hey, buddy, you're dealing with perfection here. So act like you're dealing with perfection. I'm afraid a lot of us, we love in this world, in modern Christianity, to bring God down to us. Now, don't get me wrong. God, that's who God is. God spends time with his people. The Spirit indwells within us. But I think we love to take God all off of his throne, come down here, make him look cool and hip, and try to make him appealing to the world. God belongs on his throne. That is the only place that he belongs. We don't have to make God look good. He's a burning bush. He has the ability to get people's attention all by himself. I, as a pastor, I don't have to try to make him look good for you. That's not what I try to do up here. I don't try to create a burning bush. God can take care of that. And whenever that happens, you're going to find yourself being interjected in and saying, Craig, take your shoes off, for this is holy ground. couple questions that I want to pose to you this morning. The first one, what made that place holy? What was it? Was it the fire? Was it the place of Midian? Was it because Moses was there? Because Moses, he's going to go and do some pretty wonderful stuff for the honor and glory of God. But what was it that made that place holy? Y'all can preach it for me. Yeah. God made that place holy. It wasn't Moses. It wasn't the bush. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the ground around it that's being talked about. The creation was not what was the holy thing. The holy thing was the Creator. You understand that? It was God who made that place holy. He said, Moses, Moses, take your sandals off, for you're standing on holy ground. Well, how is it holy ground? Because God made the ground holy. His presence, who He is what makes it holy. See this building here? For you visitors out there, first timers, hadn't been here for very long, this is a life center. Our old sanctuary is down there. We decided for room's sake and to be able to preach to more people and to reach more people to move up here to have church. Did you know that it's not the facade, the building, that makes the place holy? We could go out in the old-fashioned tents and have some church. I don't want to. But we could, couldn't we? Did you know that it's not the songs? Brother Gary, you did a good job this morning. Choir, you did a good job this morning. Crowd, you did a good job singing this morning. But that's not what it is. I'm sure it's a newsflash for all of y'all, but it's not me. It's not me that does anything. But when we're talking about, and I believe wholeheartedly that at this moment, this is a holy place. Oh, guys, you got to believe it. And you say, well, why do I got to believe it? Because the thing that makes a place holy is what? God, the presence of God, and you've got to believe that at this moment, the presence of God is here. And if you don't believe it, let's go home. Let's go home. Because you don't want to hear a speech from me, because that's all this would be, is just a speech, a motivational talk. I can't motivate you. God can motivate you. And so, but the presence of God is what we're dealing with here. Right here, in this moment, in a life center with a basketball floor underneath us. A makeshift stage. Doug did a good job building this. And I helped him out. Piano and organ and drums and a couple TVs, some microphones and some sound system. Who cares about all that? The place that makes this holy, the thing that does it, is our God. And so that's what it is. Moses had walked up on a situation. He had walked up on a burning bush. He had no anticipations of dealing with God. Maybe this morning you had no anticipations of dealing with God. Maybe you came here because some family comes here. Maybe you came here out of obligation. And so maybe you had no anticipation of dealing with God. But hopefully you've been interjected in right now. And He's just spoken to your heart. And to help you understand that He's here. And that because He's here, this is a real place of holiness. A real place of holiness. Next question. What was happened? That's a terribly phrased word. English teachers, I apologize. Well, what happened to Moses as a result of this encounter? You got to understand that when you walk up on a burning bush and when you deal with a holy God, you're not going to walk away unchanged. We're talking about life change. Got it? You're not going to walk up and see this God on display and think, wow, that's cool, and walk away like nothing has ever happened. You could do that with a lot of earthly stuff, a lot of worldly stuff, but we're not dealing with earthly stuff here. We're not dealing with something that is bound to this world. We're dealing something that is outside of the cosmos. We're dealing with God. And when you meet with God, you know that you've met with God. When you spend time with God, you know that you spent time with God. And it is going to change your life. You think about all the interjections that we've talked about here. Saul, Saul, what happened to him? He became Paul and one of the greatest missionaries that this world has ever seen. Martha, Martha, what happened to her? She was there at the end of Jesus' life. She had given her life over to him. You go Samuel, he was but a young boy, but he knew that the calling was what he needed, and he gave and devoted his whole entire life. You talk about Abraham, he was willing to kill his own son for the glory of God. All that we've talked about, everybody that we've talked about, all of the characters in Scripture. Simon, Simon, what happened to Simon? You say, well, he went and he denied Jesus 3 times. Yes, but what happened after that? He was restored. Everything was mended, and he became one of the pillars of the early church. When God interjects in your life, you may not change your name, but your life is a brand new life. Moses, he's a shepherd. We've got to understand where Moses is at this point. He is running from God. Turn to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7 here. Bible drill. What verse do I start with, Greg? 23? All right. It says here in Acts chapter 7. The preaching deacon, Stephen, is talking to a bunch of Pharisees here, preaching to them, telling them the history and all that God has done for them. In verse 23, now when he was 40, talking about Moses, now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. For he supposed, verse 25, hold on to this verse, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. At some point, we've got to understand, Moses and God has had some conversations while he is in Egypt. Somehow, some way, God has told Moses, sometime in the future, you are going to lead my people out. You are going to take us out of bondage, and you're going to take us home. And so Moses, understanding his role here, he sees some Egyptian messing with the Israelite, and he goes and he kills the Egyptian. And he says, well, surely they would understand what's happening, because I'm Moses, and I've been told that I'm going to do this. And the next day, verse 26, he appeared to 2 of them as they were fighting, 2 Israelites, and tried to reconcile them, saying, men, you are brethren. Why do you wrong one another? But he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? Moses is looking at the 2 guys squabbling or fighting or whatever it was, and he says, guys, you're on the same team here. And one looks at them and he says, who are you to tell us what to do? Do you think you're a ruler and a judge over us? And at this point, then at this saying, Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. What did he flee from? He fled from Pharaoh. He killed an Egyptian. He was no doubt going to be in trouble. He fled probably the other Israelites, the other Hebrews, because they weren't for him. But ultimately, do you know what he was getting away from? He was getting away from God. He was getting away from what God had told him he was going to do. Back up to verse 25. For he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. This wasn't something that Moses just came up with. God had told him. said, Moses, you're going to lead my people out. And so Moses took things into his own hands, goes before God, and before he knows it, he's in Midian running from God. And then he sees this bush. He marries, has a couple sons, creates a life of his own. He's a shepherd. And out shepherding one day, he sees this bush. The thing's not burning up. Why is it not burning up? Let me go figure out why it's not burning up. And then the bush talks. It says, Moses, Moses, take your sandals off because you're on holy ground. He says, verse 6 back in Exodus chapter 3, he says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid of God. And then they go on to have this conversation. He says, Moses, which a lot of times we think that this is the first time that Moses hears about this God-sized plan. Moses, you're going to lead my people out. It evidently isn't the first time that Moses has heard about it. He heard about it a long time ago, but ran from it. And so he says, Moses, you're going to lead my people out. If you will allow me to paraphrase here for a moment. You're going to lead my people out. And what does Moses say? God, I can't talk. I stutter too much. God says, I got you taken care of. I'm going to send Aaron with you, and he will be your mouthpiece. Moses says, how will they know that I'm here to send you out? Because I've tried this before, God. I've tried it before, and it didn't work. And so how are they going to know that it is you that sent me? And God tells Moses, tell them that I am sent you. And so when all is said and done, Moses packs up everything and he goes to Egypt. The question, what happened to Moses after this holy encounter? He gave his whole entire life to the plan of God. His whole entire life to the plan of God. It was a take two moment. Take one didn't work itself out. But take two happened the way that it was supposed to happen. And you remember the story. Pharaoh let my people go, and Pharaoh is like, no, 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 no. These are our slaves. Our economy is based on this. All sorts of good stuff. The Nile's turned to blood. Flies and gnats and death of livestock and the sun going black and so many other things happened. God showing his holiness and his power not only to Moses, not only to the Egyptians, but to the whole entire world. So what do you do? What do you do with an encounter with God? You've got to understand that we're not dealing with anything that is, like I said earlier, worldly, fleshly, bound by the laws of this world, but we're dealing with a God that is outside. And you've got to understand that when you encounter a holy God, not passing by. See, I think a lot of us Sundays are just passing by moments. And when you're just passing by, it's a quick, hey, quick, how you doing? And then a quick, I'll see you next week. There's nothing different, no life change, nothing is going on. And you go on about your regular business. But when you encounter, you plant yourself, and you get to know, and you are reverent, and you understand what he wants and who he is. So what are you going to do? Let me tell you something. You can read back up in verse 1. This burning bush is on Mount Horeb, which when you read a little bit later, this is Mount Sinai. Do you know what happened on Mount Sinai? It's going to be a couple years later, going through the plagues, going through the travel to Mount Sinai. But Moses is going to walk up Mount Sinai, and God is going to give him the 10 Commandments, and he's going to give him all of the law. You can go and read in the book of Leviticus, and it's a hard read, but it's a wonderful read. Do you know why Leviticus is a wonderful read? Because in those verses, you see who God is. You see what God demands. You see, God demands perfection, guys. As you read the 10 Commandments, we talked about one in Sunday school, honor your father and your mother. If you've perfectly kept that one, raise your hand. Good, there's no liars, because that was the one to follow. Put no other gods before me. Thou shalt not steal. Have you never stolen anything before? Well, I have never stolen anything before. Oh, but then Jesus corrects some things a little bit later. You say, well, I've never murdered anybody before. What does Jesus say? Jesus says, if you hate your brother, you are murdering. I've never cheated on Kristen, so don't lump me in the do not commit adultery column. If you think on someone else the wrong way, then you've done wrong. We're all guilty. And so we sit here, and the first thing that we've got to understand is Moses came down, and he was given these stone tablets that God wrote on. Wonderful moment. Go read it in the book of Exodus. God is awesome. Thunderings and lightnings and powerful earthquakes, all of that comes with God. But Paul says very clearly that the law is a schoolmaster. It tells you that you've done wrong. I'm not the bearer of bad news. God's holy word is the bearer of bad news. So what are you going to do with the holy encounter? You are going to realize how small and insignificant you are, and how big and powerful and awesome our God is. If you've broken one law, you've broken them all. And so every single one of you, every single one of you, good, bad, been in jail, not been in jail, every single one of us, we don't meet God's standard. Right? Creates a problem, doesn't it, Brother Jim? Because of our sin, well, what happens to us? We're condemned. He said that, not me. We're condemned. The Bible says that God cannot look on sin, and so we've got to go to hell. Every single one of us in here, we are condemned to hell. Hell is a real place of real torment, of real eternity. But God saw another way, didn't he, Brother Jim? What was that way? Oh, say that name again. Jesus. Say that name for me. Say it one more time. Say it like you've had an encounter with him this morning. Do you know what Jesus did? Jesus was God's way to bring us to him. The God that is in a holy bush that never burns up. The God that makes all around him holy. The God that is perfect is able to bring us to him. Isn't that good? I hope so, because that is our only hope, friend. It's for us to look to Jesus Christ and what he did for us on the cross, and he rose again on the third day, and by that we have the ability to put our faith and trust in him, and we are able to come here every single week, and to not cower down and be scared of our God, but in boldness and triumph to come before the throne of our God because of what Jesus did for us. It changed Moses' life. Has it changed your life? Salvation will change your life. It'll change it so much, it's going to give you a brand new one. A brand new life. And it's not a defeated life, but it's a victorious life. It's a life where you don't have to struggle with this world and what all is in it. But we get to hand things over to God, trust in God, believe in God, lean on God, give things to God. Let Him be our shoulder. Let Him be our strength. Let Him be our refuge. Let Him be our fortress. Let Him be the one that forgives us. Let Him be the one to lift us up. Guys, there's a burning bush right here. Don't think I'm crazy. I understand there's not one right here. But God is here. And God is looking at you as an individual. You as an individual, and He is searching, finding, knocking, bringing, drawing. He's doing whatever He needs to with your life this morning. What are you going to do with your encounter with God this morning? You've got a couple different options. The lost person, you've got only one option. One option is to hand your life over to Him. Look at Jesus. Look at what He did. Put your faith and trust in Him. If you've never done that before, we're going to encourage you here in a moment to come forward, and I would love to talk with you. Saved person, you've got several different options. One, you need to be baptized. If you've never been baptized, that's your next step of obedience. That's what He's going to be interjecting this morning. A holy God requires obedience. Church membership. It's important to be locked in and working and being a part of one of His local churches. It's important. If this is where you feel like your place of worship is for you and your family, come forward and we'll take care of it. Sheer obedience and a life that is lived to be holy is the next thing. You need to have a holy marriage. Best of your ability, you need to have holy kids. You need to have a holy workspace. All of these areas of life handed over to God. What are you going to do with your encounter? Or are you passing by? Are you passing by? Let's stand and let's sing.